This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company, which today will be the first half hour of our political series, Decision 2012. City Talks host Doug Muzzio and I are co-hosting the conversation for the hour. Well, it's now September. The Republicans have a vice presidential candidate. The party conventions are over, and the campaigns are in full swing. To discuss how the campaign unfolded over the summer, we've asked our two favorite political consultants and analysts, Ed Rollins and Bob Shrum, to join us in another discussion of the parties and the candidates. So let's start with the first thing that happened was the vice presidential nomination. Was that is he a good vice presidential candidate?
I think he gave the energy to the base of the party, and unlike Palin, who faltered as time went on, I think he'll get stronger. He's a very good interviewer. He's certainly very substantive. I don't think they're quite using him as much with his substance as they should, but he's basically very popular, and he's made Wisconsin a competitive state at this point in time, which is a big advantage.
I get confused with the Republicans because I think
You're not
a lot of things. I'm not the only one, right? But I thought that Romney was looking for the independent voters. And it seems to me that Ryan is not the kind of person that's going to attract.
There aren't many independent voters. There's this great
myth about
independent voters. You know, you're really down to 5, maybe 8% maximum voters who have not made up their mind. Half of them may not even vote. This is really a base election in which both sides are pushing hard to energize their base.
Don't you think that Ryan just polarizes it even more?
I think Ryan was the wrong choice. I think Marco Rubio would have been a better choice.
Why?
Well, first of all, Republicans have a terrible Hispanic problem.
Yeah.
And the idea that the Romney campaign is praying to get 30% of the Hispanic vote, and then maybe they can just squeak by getting enough of the white vote, that's very bad political calculation. Ed worked for Ronald Reagan, who understood, and they understood you needed, and Hispanics were much less significant then, but you needed outreach to them. George W. Bush understood it very well and won 44% of them, I am sad to say, in 2004, which is why John Kerry lost the election. That's number one. Number two, I think that getting all these leaks out of the Romney campaign now about who made the mistakes of this, that, or the next thing, and one of the ones apparently is that most of his advisors wanted him to pick someone like Rob Portman because they thought he would do no harm. But, you know, we'll see.
He made the decision himself?
I think I'm told, but you know they don't confide in me, but they're confiding in everybody right now. I'm told that it was a matter of chemistry.
Rubio, for whatever reason, and I'm a big Rubio fan, and I advocated very much for Rubio for months for the very reasons you lay out. But more important, if you don't win Florida, you might as well go home. And we lost Florida by 240,000 votes last time. He's a very dynamic candidate right there in itself. He could be a real benefit, but equally as important, he's a candidate of the future. Whether you win or lose, he's someone that basically can make the inroads in the community beyond the Cuban-American community. And I thought that he would be, he gave the most exciting speech at the convention. He's got a great story to tell.
That was not a high bar.
Well,
you can say that.
No, it wasn't.
But I also thought that when you put a ticket together, you're trying to balance strengths and things. And of course, now we see with foreign policy that they didn't add a thing.
But to go to Ed's point that this is a base election, it was a balance. The moderate, coreless, no principles, Romney with the hard
but that's not what Romney
Ryan.
projects himself as.
It doesn't matter. The Republican base, he's gone through two primaries now, and there's never been any great love among the conservatives who make up the majority of the Republicans in the base. So obviously, the vice presidential choice was important to solidify that base. you know, the dynamics of the way we pick and all the rest of it is all different today. It's not like the old days where there used to be a balance and there used to be, you know, I mean, I remember in 1980, Ronald Reagan wanted either Jack Kemp or Paul Laxalt. People spent 3 days arguing you couldn't have a guy from Nevada and a guy from California. You couldn't have a football star and a movie star. At the end of the day, either one of them would have, Reagan was going to win in 1980, and either one of them would have immeasurably helped him and given conservatives the future of the party, where in turn we gave it back to Bush, and obviously it changed the dynamics for a long period of time.
And then the way they presented it, that it's youth, and it's, well, of course it solidifies our feeling that that's the future of the Republican Party. I mean, we have to admit now, right? That's gone. It's just it's an assumption that the Republican Party is going to stay very far right and even go righter.
I'm just writing about this for the Daily Beast, but I think if Romney loses, and I think there's a fair likelihood that he will, there's going to be a civil war in the Republican Party. It's going to be between, I'll call them for shorthand purposes, the Jeb Bush Republicans and the Paul Ryan Republicans. You could also call them the Mike Huckabee Republicans. And there will be, the first thing that will be said is, first you forced us to accept George W. Bush, who turned out to be a big government, big spending guy. Then you forced us to accept John McCain. Then you forced us to accept Mitt Romney. We're not going to do it again. And the Bush people on the other side, the Jeb Bush people, or whoever would be the analog there, they're going to be saying, look, we got to be a little kinder and a little gentler. Bush, for example, is now writing a book on immigration where he's saying we can't just have a message of closed borders. We have to have a message about welcoming people to this country. Now, I think demographically he's right long term in terms of the Republican Party. But I think it'll be a fierce struggle if Romney loses.
I think there'll be a bloodletting if Romney loses for the very reasons you laid out. This was a classic campaign that was going to be between originally Mike Huckabee and Romney, and I was Huckabee's chairman.
Huckabee would have won.
I think Huckabee would have won too. Huckabee chose not to run. He had a couple grandchildren, a whole variety of reasons why he didn't run. But that would have been the ideological. I mean, the mere fact that a Santorum or a Gingrich, who weren't really viable or credible candidates, could make a race with no money, no resources. Romney became the establishment candidate. He has the money. The money now is playing a very, very significant role in the party. And at the end of the day, it may be too much. It may be in the sense that they don't understand the grassroots. They don't understand the ideological part of it. But at the same time, you know, someone comes in these super PACs and they give you $10 million or $20 million. You pay attention to them. And this campaign in particular has paid a great deal of attention to them.
Doug, what do you think about this?
I think what I'm seeing is, I mean, trying to keep the sort of the chronological focus, that the conventions worked much better for the Democrats than they did for the Republican. Bob, you've argued that the speeches, both the Obama president's speech as well as the Clinton speech, were back-to-back homers, and that the narrative, they did a better job with the narrative and the message.
I think that's pretty clear, but let me as a background say, you know, all this stuff that was written before the conventions don't matter.
That's
It's
not
ridiculous.
true. I
Completely
agree with
ridiculous.
you. They totally shaped this
Yeah, the
campaign.
audiences are smaller than they were, but some of the same things still happen. Ronald Reagan made himself broadly acceptable to the American people at the 1980 Republican Convention. Al Gore was about 13 points behind Bush going into the Democratic Convention in 2000. He came out of it about 5 points ahead. Bill Clinton in 1992, convention played a huge role in what happened to him.
The Republicans.
And what I think happened was, and I, you know, Ed's an expert at this and has done it, and I've done some of it too. I don't understand what the narrative thread of the Republican convention was supposed to be. Yeah. It was partly, let's make Romney a nice man or a likable man, which I'm not sure was the direction they should have gone in any way. Maybe they should have said, look, I'm a serious guy, and I admit it, but these are serious times. But even if it was likability, it was all broken into pieces so that you had, I thought Ann Romney was fine, but kind of abstract, not concrete. I thought that Rubio gave a good speech, although, and I thought, by the way, that Chris Christie was a disaster. I have a keynote speaker. How do you lose control of your own convention? So you have a keynote speaker who doesn't mention the nominee until 15 minutes into the speech. But then to put Clint Eastwood up there, and once again, I think a lot of people around Romney are saying he did it, that's a bad sign. I think Ed would agree with me. When the people in the campaign start blaming the candidates, a bad sign.
Well, fundamentally, before they got to the convention, and I agree totally, the Democrats understood their base. Your convention looked like a convention. It was crowded. It had your constituents. Your speakers addressed the candidacy, and they talked about what Obama had done for them, and they reinforced themselves, and they came out of it. Ours was kind of like, well, here's some future people we have in our party, and it'll be better in the future than it is today. And where, you know, I think the failure of the Romney campaign to define themselves from May forward in that period of those 2 or 3 months when they had a tremendous amount of money. I mean, historically, and I started talking about the money, we were outspent $400 million last time. It didn't matter if McCain would have had $400 million. He was not going to win. There was a Bush fatigue. He wasn't a good candidate. But having the resources this time, everyone knew that Obama can't make himself a great president. What he can do is he can basically make Romney an unacceptable alternative. And I thought they did a very effective job in the 2 months of the summer doing that.
Yeah, well, that's by the way, when you talked about the critical thing in the summer, I was almost going to say the first critical thing in the summer wasn't picking Ryan. It was Romney deciding to cede the summer to Obama. Right. Romney lost the summer hands down, and Obama succeeded in defining him. And I think when we look back on the campaign, if Romney loses, that will be a very critical decision. Yeah. The other thing, by the way, I have to say about conventions and speeches, and that I do know a fair amount about, the very idea that they apparently had draft after draft after draft of this speech, some of it being written by people who'd never met Romney, and it was just being shredded and thrown away, and they were still fighting over what to say a couple of days before the speech. I mean, if you know your message, you should be able to get to a speech. In most of the enterprises I've been associated with, I don't think that would have been tolerated. What was interesting, to go to your other question about the Democratic convention, was not only had a narrative thread, it did a very good job of exploiting mistakes the Republicans made, for example, not talking about Afghanistan and the troops. Bill Clinton did a brilliant job. As I wrote, he took out the trash. That is, he went through all the stuff that was being said against Obama so that Obama could then, on his own, get up the next night. And that speech is a very underrated speech. All the people I've talked to who were involved in testing as he was giving that speech did very well.
Can I just interrupt, because you guys, you said you're experienced, you're both experienced analysts.
That means we're old.
I consider, well, I'm old too, but I consider myself an experienced voter, and that was always my strength in politics. If I don't understand what you're doing, then something's wrong with your message. And where is the common sense in all of this? And I think that's what was partly lacking in the Republican convention. They wanted to go to women. So Ann Romney gets up and makes a speech about how wonderful Romney is and how nice, and women, I love you. That's not enough. I mean, that actually antagonized me even more. It's not that easy to get somebody there. And then when you looked at the audience and the lack of enthusiasm, that obviously was
Bob and I have done lots of campaigns. We've been on the opposite side of a few, and we've certainly done a lot of them. What I think you always do is you take your candidate, and whoever they are,
you try to make the best of it.
You make the best of it. You don't try and change them.
That's
right. You build up their strengths and you compensate for their weaknesses. Well, you're not going to make a man in his 60s into a warm, fuzzy guy if he's not. You know, and then what you did is you basically walked away from the one place that he's not challengeable. Is he a competent businessman?
Yeah.
And the mistake that they have made in this campaign, with the economy being the overwhelming issue from start to finish, is that basically they never gave a lesson in Econ 101. Here's how we build jobs. It's not about government, which obviously has been the Democrats' premise. Ours is about small business and what have you. That takes capital, that takes this, that takes that. They have talked about none of that. And to a certain extent, you know, the word leadership has never come forth in this, and that's what I would challenge this president on, is that he has failed to lead the country effectively. Now, has he done programs that Democrats like? Absolutely. And I think to a certain extent that's what he's tried to stress. But I think to a certain extent the strength of Romney would have been to tell his own story. There was a narrative there. And the narrative, just to quickly go through it, as a young man, I went to the convention and I saw my father, who I admired more than anybody in the world, booed off the stage by the right-wingers. I saw my mother, who ran for the United States Senate, who was a wonderful woman, basically get badly defeated. I walked away from politics. I had no interest in politics. I went out and spent 20 years of my life. I made a lot of money. I made a lot of money and created a lot of jobs. That's a narrative. That's a true narrative.
But then he interrupts it. He comes back and he's governor, and then he's running for president.
There's nothing wrong with that. After a 20-year career, he lived in Boston. He basically thought the state needed a different premise. I got elected. That's when I ran into the liberal wall, and that's when I became more conservative. Ronald Reagan didn't become a conservative until 1962.
I know.
You know, so.
But he was so much more adept at just changing and
but
doing
at the
things.
end of the story,
The
story, there is a story there. It's
Well,
never,
I think
it's never
that
been told.
I think that's a pretty creative story, and I think it would have been persuasive. It had some chinks in it, which I think they were afraid of. You know, I was involved in Senator Kennedy's campaign against Romney in 1994, and the Bain ads were devastating to Romney then. Now, he had 18 years advance notice that this was coming at him. How could you enter a presidential campaign and not have a contingency plan on how you're going to deal with this? And if they had such a plan, then I think your narrative becomes possible. Or alternatively, if you're going to run for president, and you know from 2005 or 2006 on you're going to run for president, make 5 or 10 years of your tax returns releasable. I mean,
Especially
you know, pay more if you have to.
When you ask your vice presidential candidate to give him 10 years.
Oh, I'm not quarreling with your
I don't
analysis
mean
of what
to.
they should have done, but
Guys.
there's something that holds them back.
I don't dispute that. And being perfectly honest, you don't have a CPA go through your taxes. You have somebody political go through your taxes. And at the end of the day, I'm sure he paid every tax that was ever due. But
there might have been years when there wasn't much due.
That's the point. And you know, you now have to go back. And the only thing the public wants to know, I've had some rich candidates in the past, and when the public knows you've paid taxes, made a lot of money, paid a lot of taxes, okay, it's no big deal. In this particular case, it looks like there's something out there that's not valid, and I think that has damaged him immeasurably. And why, after having gone through this experience, I had everything that they've used against him 4 years ago when I was with Huckabee, and so did everybody else running for the race. You know, as you know how you run your races, and we run them the same, I always begin with the opposition research, and I put the campaign plan together against my own candidate. And then I get my defenses ready for that. And I don't feel they've done that very well.
But Bob said it last time. He said he doesn't have a campaign plan, he has a business plan. And the business plan doesn't have the flexibility
here's the
and the creativeness.
Well, the business plan lacked any sense of what Ed calls narrative.
Yeah.
The business plan was, this election is a pure referendum.
Right.
You know, we're going to go out and say to people, if you feel kind of bad, then give me a try. And that fell apart over the summer and in the conventions, I think partly because he didn't have a narrative, partly because he seeded the summer, partly, by the way, because they borrowed your old boss's question. I have a rule in politics. Don't ever take somebody else's defining line and try to use it as yours. So they say, you're better off today than you were 4 years ago. And, you know, you could argue this, but the Democrats are out with an ad today that's going to be played all over that says, here's what was happening 4 years ago. Here's what we've done. Not perfect, long way to go, but we're fighting back. It's the lack of originality in it. And authenticity and originality are lacking.
My argument, and I've said this publicly, I don't care what we did in 1980. It worked for us in 1980, and I agree with you totally. The question should be, he inherited a mess, he made it worse, and he doesn't have the capacity of the people to fix it.
You could have made that argument, and of course I wouldn't agree with it. The president wouldn't agree with it, but you could have a big fight about it.
Right.
But by leading with the Reagan question, they've now made the question, well, here's Lehman Brothers was collapsing. You know, we were on the verge of losing millions of jobs.
And they were so negative, so disastrous about what the world we're living in.
If you run out of creative, maybe if you run out of creative thought, you just take somebody else's speech.
But the premise was from the beginning, and this is the biggest mistake. And you know, once again, they may win this thing. This is still a doable race. It's not as doable as it may have been a couple of months ago, but the issue that they always operated under is that this president has been so bad and the numbers are so bad that the country's not going to reelect him. And we just have to be an acceptable alternative. And they're going to try and make us an unacceptable alternative. I would argue that basically you've got to give people some reasons. What is your plan? Where are you going to take the country? And they have not done that effectively. There's not one single memorable. We've been running for office for over a year. The only thing anybody can remember either out of the primaries or so far in the general is 999 by kind of a discredited
or I'll bet you $10,000.
Right, or a discredited pizza guy. There's not a single
Or
thing.
Clint Eastwood.
Well, Clint Eastwood was a different.
Right.
Singing
You know, it
some of the
just-
songs.
Well, we'll see how well his movie does. He may have been the ultimate victory. This new movie that's coming out.
But you know, the irony of it is the economy is not the only issue of this campaign, and increasingly, I think it's not necessarily going to be the major issue, especially now with what happened.
Unless something really big happens.
Right.
It's gonna be
It's
major.
still.
But it's been diluted. I mean, you can't just talk about the economy.
I disagree with that. I think the country clearly wants someone that can fix it. We've not made as convincing an argument of how we can fix it as we need
But
to.
I don't understand.
And that goes to the strategy of the Romney people, or lack thereof. I mean, we've talked about they lost the summer in terms of defining themselves. They did not put together a coherent mention in the convention. Ryan didn't help that much. And then we have this whole Libya kerfuffle where, again, they're certainly stepping on the economy message.
It's not just Libya.
No, it's a syndrome.
What's happened here is they're now chasing every news
Right.
cycle.
Right.
So, you know, I think the Libya thing was bad. We'll wait and see where the polls go on this and all that. I think it was just a mistake. Somebody handed him a statement. It's a kind of statement.
but he doubled down on it.
I
That
know, but
tells you something.
Well, that's because there's this theory that if you've done it, you got to keep doing it. I don't agree with that either. But he certainly didn't have to hold that press conference the next day. But now, what are we talking about today in public?
Right.
We're talking about the disarray in the Romney campaign and the people leaking out stories about Stuart Stevens is bad, Rush Riffer is bad, the presidential candidate is bad.
neocons are bad.
You know, every day that Romney not only doesn't talk about the economy, because it isn't enough for him to just talk about the economy, but every day he doesn't do and push the kind of thing Ed's talking about, which is here's what I want to do. When that's not the dominant news story, that's another day lost.
But I think he also displays a lack of judgment almost consistently in different areas. Am I wrong about that?
I don't think the public has that much of a view of that. I think part of it is, and Bob's point is very valid, when a campaign starts having internal battles, these guys have been together for a long, long time, and they've been fairly disciplined. I'm not a part of it, so I'm not going to critique them, having been in a lot of campaigns in which, you know, I don't allow disarray in my campaigns. I have a discipline. I put all-star people together, but everybody knows their job.
Well, what role does the candidate play in the control of the staff?
Well, he can't, if a candidate tries to manage his own campaign.
I'm not talking about managing a campaign. I'm talking about managing the staff.
He basically made the choices, and at the end of the day, this is a guy who basically likes. He's afraid of all stars. He basically likes a comfort level, and he had an all-star cast 4 years ago. He had some of the best operatives in the business. He made a choice. He didn't want confrontation. He didn't want. But the idea, and in fairness to Stuart Stevens, who's the media consultant, he's been more than the media consultant. He's been the strategist. He's been the communications director. He's had, and Schrieffer is his partner. And they ran the convention. They have run every element of this campaign. They write every speech. You cannot logistically do all of those things. You've done a lot in campaigns, and I've done a lot in campaigns. You cannot basically.
But it doesn't reflect on the leadership ability or the judgment of the candidate?
Well, at the end of the day, the candidate has to get what he wants, and I think to a certain extent.
Does Romney know what he wants?
I can't answer that question. I'm not a part of it. I'm not a Romney person, so it would not be fair.
I don't mean to come down.
No,
to
it would not.
everything
It would not be fair. It would not be fair for me to. All I can do is just like anybody else, watch it from the outside and know right now it's not working. But I don't want to second guess any of the people that are there. And it doesn't do me any good. It doesn't do them any good.
I don't, you know, obviously I'm further away from it than you are.
Right.
But I don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you were talking earlier about making him soft and fuzzy and cuddly when he's in his mid-60s. So they put him on this show with Kelly Ripa and
Which is
Michael
nuts,
Strahan.
absolutely.
And he tells us
The wrong place.
He tells us that he wears as little to bed as possible, which was not an image we necessarily needed. And then he says Snooki is his favorite TV star on Jersey Shore. And I had one of your fellow Republicans, who's a friend of mine, call me and said, you know, Jersey Shore's been canceled and Mitt's next. I mean, you know, how could you make this decision to go on that show in the middle of this unfolding Libya crisis?
I think what's happening, Bob, and I think what's happening is they're down to that 4 or 5%, as opposed to making the big broad brush type of a campaign they've attempted to run. I think they're chasing once again the silver the silver coins in the water. And we're down to 3 or 4%. What do these people want? Let's try and, how do we connect with those people? As opposed to, you run the thing from start to finish on whatever you decide your major themes are. And if you're trying to micro target to go get voters, as you know, that last 4 or 5% are the least interested. They're not partisan. They're going to make 1 or 2 decisions. I'm going to vote or not vote. Right. Usually I vote against somebody as opposed to voting for someone. And to go chase them by basically altering a series of things that have been important to you all the way through here, you're going to start to lose your own little base that you need more than anything else.
Do you think that Obama is going to get votes because they're voting against Romney, or are
the other
people
way.
voting the other?
It's more the other way. Republicans overwhelmingly
don't want Obama.
Obama, and that's what has solidified. When you look at our political base, it's a very religious oriented. The people go to church. It's married. It's older voters, and at this point in time, they may be happier with Romney than they were 6 months ago. But it's really unhappiness with Obama that is.
And on the other side, though, I feel that the Obama supporters are coming back, and they're voting for Obama
there's a lot
more than voting against Romney. I just wanted to add one thing. I thought Biden did a really good job at the convention because he set it up for Obama. He talked about how brilliant Obama was.
Well, the stories about those two decisions.
Continuous thing.
Stories about, but that's the kind of thing Ed's talking about.
Right.
You want a narrative.
Exactly. Right.
What's the story?
Right.
So you start with Kerry, who talks about foreign policy and what he's seen and the troops, and then you go to Biden, and then you go to the president. It could be very powerful.
Yeah.
Look, I think there's a lot of indication in the data that the enthusiasm gap either closed or reversed as a result of these 2 conventions. Democrats are at least as enthusiastic, maybe more enthusiastic about voting for the president. And that's a big part of the story. Because if young people turn out, if African Americans turn out, I mean, the Romney pollster, Neil Newhouse, who's a nice guy, put out a memo saying, with no polling data, saying don't pay any attention to the polls and the methodology is all wrong.
Right.
Now, I don't know whether Ed would agree with this. I think when you start telling people that the methodology in the polls is all wrong, you got a problem.
All right, guys, we're going to thank you both. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Bob. And now we're going to return in 30 seconds to continue the conversation with City Talk.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Indeed, the second half of Ronnie Eldridge's and my conversation with 2 of America's premier political strategists and analysts, advisors to presidential candidates, Ed Rollins and Bob Shrum. Gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Ronnie. Okay, the first part of the show, Ronnie's segment, we talked a lot about Mitt Romney. Let's talk a little bit about Obama. What does Obama have to do to take this still close election and win from a strategic point of view? What does he have to do? Well, besides getting 270 electoral votes, which we'll talk about.
Look, I think it's a remarkably skilled campaign and a terrifically disciplined operation because of what Ed talked about earlier, which is Romney seeding the summer, losing the summer. The Obama campaign was able to change this from a referendum into a choice, and they defined the question, who's for the middle class? And in fact, Romney's out there running around right now saying, by the way, I'm for the middle class too. That's not the ground he should want to be playing on. He should have wanted to play on the kind of ground that Ed described. So I think, A, that they will be very disciplined on message. B, I think the debates will matter, as the convention mattered, because I think people this year have been a little uncertain. The 2 sides are hardened in their choices now, but those people in the middle, I think there's some uncertainty. And Romney has the advantage of going into those debates with thoroughly lowered expectations. So he could actually come out doing fairly well by doing better than people thought he was going to do. Thirdly, I think turnout operations are going to matter tremendously. And here is where I would give a big advantage to Obama. I see no sign that the Romney campaign understands the revolutions that we've seen in turnout operations, let alone what was going on 10, 15 years ago. It seems to be an almost totally media-driven campaign. Now, I don't buy this stuff, people running around now saying, oh, it should be all grassroots and nothing on television and all of that. That's ridiculous. The reason, there's a free market here, the reason people put this stuff on television is because it works. But right now, you really need, take a state like Pennsylvania with this voter ID law. I will bet you, and I don't know this, but I will bet you that the Obama campaign has in place a way to deal with that voter ID law if it happens to survive, and to help their people get to the polls and vote. They're very good at it. So that's what he's got to do, and he's got to do well in these debates. And he's got to handle any international crisis or any economic crisis that comes along.
Ed.
I think the international crisis or the potential of something on that front is the danger. It's very difficult to beat an incumbent president, and even, I mean, you
Yes, I know that.
You do. I mean, there's just
Almost did, but
Right.
there's
it
extraordinary.
almost doesn't count.
Almost doesn't count. There's extraordinary advantages. This was always an uphill battle for Romney in the sense that the 9 targeted states last time all went to him. We have to win back 5 of those. And we don't win Florida, we don't win Ohio, we don't win North Carolina, we don't win Virginia, and something else to give us the 270. We can't get there. Obama can win losing Ohio or Florida. He can't lose both. We can't. We've got to win both of those. Both of those are tough states.
So you're saying essentially that this is, third or fourth battleground election, and the election's going to take place in those, 8, 9, 10 states.
It's not 8, 9, or 10. What's interesting
It's fewer.
is how the Romney campaign has, in my view, effectively ceded Michigan. They've gone back into Wisconsin because of Ryan. They appear to have ceded Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They appear to have ceded New Mexico, which was a classic battleground state in 2000 and 2004. Went for Gore, then went for Bush by a little bit each time. Now Obama has a big lead there. I'm not saying that they're making a mistake in ceding these states. Given everything that's happened, they're losing by a big margin, and Ed's right. They have got to. I think they got to win Florida and Ohio to win this election.
Well, they do. They can't. They can't.
They got to win both of them.
Yeah.
So we're in agreement on, go
I
ahead,
just
Ron.
want to ask you a question. You're talking about how good you think the Obama campaign is and how well directed and everything else. Why weren't they able to get that message out during the 3 years past?
Because
Well-
there was no campaign.
I mean, why was
Well, there was a deeper problem.
Right.
I think the criticism of the president in 2008 actually had things backwards. People said he's all speech and no substance.
Yeah.
For the first 2.5 years
More
of his
substance.
presidency, it was almost all substance and very little speech.
Yeah.
And that didn't change until last
But he's got
September.
the same
with his-
advisors, the same advisors in the campaign
But
as now.
I know,
Why were they so bad?
I don't know what, they weren't bad.
I know,
I mean, they
bad.
weren't bad. The truth
It's
is,
just-
whether you like what they did or not, they achieved an enormous amount, especially in those first 2 years. And so much was coming at them, from the auto bailout to the economic crisis, to health care, to the financial reform, that they weren't taking the time to sort of explain this to people. Now, he's doing it now.
Yeah.
And the
very
convention
effective.
the convention did a very good job of doing it. And Ed's right, it wasn't a campaign season. But we do live in a permanent campaign. And my guess is if he's reelected, and I think he will be, but if he's reelected, he will spend a lot more time remembering the lesson of Ronald Reagan. That you not only want to change things, you want to keep communicating with people constantly about what the change is and why you're doing it.
Having been both in the White House and having run a presidential campaign, they're two different places, and you can't. The skills are not necessarily one and the same. There's a lot of conflicting entities in a White House, and they probably put too many people from the campaign who tried to run. I mean, my issue, and not that David Axelrod is not an extremely talented campaign strategist, but every time you put him on TV on every particular issue, and he was on every single Sunday, you're saying politics, politics, as opposed to putting Mrs. Sebelius, the Secretary of HHS. Why can't she, beautiful, attractive, articulate woman who was a governor of a state, she's Secretary of HHS, why isn't she out selling health care? You have the Congress that obviously Pelosi overtook in the sense of becoming the persona non grata in America for her activities. You had Rahm Emanuel, a very, very aggressive chief of staff who took on a personality. And so my sense is they're back to where the political people are running a campaign, which they ran probably the best campaign I've ever seen 4 years ago. I agree with Bob that I think their great skill that I don't see on my side to the same extent is the get out the vote effort. And if this is a base election, if this is basically identifying your supporters, and particularly young supporters, I mean, we know how to get out old people, which are our base, and we know how to get out the church groups and what have you, which is our base. But going after young people, going after the Hispanics that we have, identifying them, all those kinds of things are skill. Equally as important, I think, because there is so much money, and I would never run a campaign that I didn't do television, because there is no campaign until there is television to most people. But at the same time, we've never had this kind of money. If you live in those 9 states, it is wall to wall, 24-hour day, and it's not just the presidential, it's the independent expenditures, it's the congressional, Senate campaigns. I don't think you can drive a message the same way. It used to be you wait up, you spend more money, you could break through with a message. I think it's going to be so many messages at this point in time that you've got to be very clever how you
That
break
goes
through.
back to your earlier point about seeding the summer.
Right.
The ad dollar spent in the summer may have gotten you a lot more
Absolutely.
than the ad dollar,
Yep.
the crowding at the end.
Right.
The other thing that I think Romney faces going forward is the possibility that if after the first debate he doesn't recover in a way that people perceive, and I'm not talking about the Gallup daily tracking poll, I'm talking about the polls in these battleground states.
Yes.
I think you could see a lot of these folks who are running Republican super PACs invest a lot more. Oh no, they won't stop.
No,
They'll put the
they'll
money
go
into
down.
congressional,
Right.
congressional and Senate
Yeah.
races.
Yeah.
Now they'll deny they're doing it,
But they will.
But
They
that's
will.
that's what will
So
happen.
have
let's
to.
talk about do you mind, the congressional races, because I saw a poll the other day. I mean, I don't read polls very often, and if I see them, I can't even understand them, but that more people are blaming the Republicans in Congress, right?
Doesn't
The
matter.
stalemate.
Doesn't matter in the House. That we're going to hold the House. We may lose 5 seats. We may lose 10 seats. It's not a generic. It's
I
not
think the House is going to
Yeah.
be
It's a local
much.
race.
Much
I think the
more
House is going to
balanced,
be
right?
much tougher for the Republicans than they imagine if things continue the way they are. And of course, Ed and I have decidedly different views of Nancy Pelosi, who I think not only was the most significant Speaker of the House in modern times in terms of what she got done and the impact she had, but she also, after 2010, she's organized the most extraordinary effort to take these seats back. And you know, it's tough to get to the majority, but to get a bunch of seats, I think is
Going to be more
within
balanced,
reach.
yeah. And the Senate?
I don't disagree with you in the sense of her skill. I've been opposite Nancy Pelosi for 30 years of my life. We grew up in the same area, and you know, when I was the chief of staff to the Republicans in the state assembly, she was the Northern California party chairman. So I go way back. I think she was one of the most effective speakers that I've seen. I think she was the one who got health care through. He never would have. But I do think that she became a very, very polarized
Well, she was
figure.
demonized. She was demonized.
And,
Totally.
and so that became sort of a distraction.
But what she's doing now, I mean, she doesn't accept the verdict that it can only be 5 or 10 seats. Then she may be wrong, but she's actually given Democrats a chance by the effort she's put into this, the money she's raised, the recruitment they've done, to take back a fair number.
She has raised money like nobody.
And as Obama's popularity or support increases, it has to have some
You know the
effect
number that would
on
terrify
these
me,
local
by the way?
candidates.
Yeah, it will. And you know the number that would scare me if I were in the Romney campaign? President's approval at 50, 51.
Yeah.
That,
And then it's broken that in recent.
Yeah.
well, that's
recent
it,
days.
that was the average today, and that includes Rasmussen.
Sure,
You took
which is a-
Rasmussen out, it'd be a
the
little
Republican.
higher.
Right. So
Thank you.
here we are. We're in mid-September. Some of the known knowns, you know, as Rumsfeld might put it behind us, the VP pick, the conventions. We've got the debates, and then we've got the unknowns. Libya, for example. Look at that as both political analysts as well as election operatives. What were they thinking? What do you believe was the intention of the Romney critique? Why double down? And hasn't that stimulated all this question?
I think this is a campaign that's been very tactical and not very strategic. And I think basically the event occurred. A guy who's on the airplane who worked in the White House with me, Rich Williamson, drafted this memorandum. They didn't circulate it among people who really have some knowledge. I think the foreign policy team has not been front and center. I don't know how qualified they are, but at the end of the day, it was an impulsive type thing without any thought process.
So you talked about earlier about the distinction between a presidential operation and a presidential staff governing and then campaigning. Does the operations of a campaign give us clues into how a president might run the
No,
country?
for two reasons. One is there's always a separation. It shouldn't be, but there's always a separation with the plane, which has the candidate and who's on the plane with the candidate, versus a White House that is Air Force One. The White House, the ground operation, and the plane are pretty much the same. But in a campaign, and you've been on the plane and you've been on the ground, oftentimes the two don't communicate.
But it still comes down. I don't want to pick on you or
It
anything.
doesn't. You can pick on me, but it doesn't.
Because you're a nice guy.
I'm a big boy.
It still comes down to the candidate's judgment.
That's not going to be the issue. Is not going to basically be people going to say, "Gee, he hasn't run a good campaign, so therefore he shouldn't be president."
No, I don't mean the campaign now. I meant the statement. Isn't it sort of an unwritten rule that in a catastrophe?
It stops at the border.
I would just argue that in a week.
Didn't he read the statement before he gave it?
I'm sure he did. If 4 or 5 days from now we're still debating his statement, then
It's bad.
it's bad. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to move on, and hopefully there's not any additional crisis. I'm not naive enough to think that these people that are very anti-American are not watching television and know exactly what's going on here. But at the end of the day, my sense is there's a factor out there that's the one thing, and I keep coming back. So Obama cannot convince anybody. A slogan I used with Reagan, a leadership that's working. He can't make that argument effectively. People aren't going to buy that, and so. The word leadership, Democrats. Well,
No, I don't agree.
Well, but it's Democrats.
Okay.
I mean, but I don't think the body politic thinks he's been a great leader. I think he inherited some troubled times. He did certain things that they may like or dislike. But I don't think anybody's going to say, "Oh my God, he's been a fabulous leader. He's really led us right out of the crisis."
He's in the position a lot of presidents are in, sort of
Yeah.
partway through
Yeah.
the time, and we look back on them now and we say that person did an extraordinary job. But we didn't see it at the moment because the job isn't finished. Look, in terms of this international crisis or the unknown unknowns, if there's another international crisis, and I pray to God there isn't, and the president handles it right, that would, Romney better handle it right. Secondly, I found the statement wholly inexplicable. I think Romney should have been listening, and this will surprise you. I think he should have been listening, or he should have called John McCain. And he should have said, "John, you know the situation. Here's the statement they want me to give. What do you think?" Now, McCain's been a good soldier. He's gone out there.
Yes,
he's tried to help
he
him
has.
out. Up to the point, McCain won't agree with the central argument of the statement. But McCain would have said, "You don't want to do that. That would be wrong. That would be wrong on the merits, and it would also be bad politics." And Ed's right. If this thing fades away, it will have been a moment in time. But of course, these moments are now precious. It will have been a moment in time when people will have gotten a glimpse of an impulsive Romney. We never thought there was an impulsive Romney, and it could hurt him. But Romney, as I said earlier, he keeps losing every news cycle because they keep pursuing every news cycle. He rides the news cycles instead of trying to create the news cycles.
Well, they're creating the latest news cycle is that the campaign is in, there's anxiety among the donors, there's anxiety among the troops, there's this internal discord. So now you might have two news cycles where the campaign's screwed up is the headline.
The critical thing about a campaign, if you run one well, is you run your own campaign. You don't let, and you try and stay on your message points. If your message is from here to that glass across the table there's going to be all kinds of things going to try and pull you off message. And when you jump off message yourself, if you're reacting to every reporter, every press story or what have you, you're never going to be able to drive your consistent message.
And that's what you would, I'm sorry.
And that takes a real message discipline is the toughest part of this whole game. And I have a rule that I've always used, having 50 years ago been a boxer. The premise was you win the rounds. You don't win the fight. You win the rounds. If you win the majority of rounds, you win the fight. I have always tried to basically win the weeks. I've always tried. There's so many weeks in a campaign. Here's what I need to accomplish this week. Here's how I'm gonna beat them this week. And it's a measurable point of view, and there's certain things that you've got to do. last couple of weeks, Romney's not won a week, and if this continues on, you're looking for a knockout in a debate or what have you. Those things don't happen anymore.
If the Romney people had asked you to run the campaign, would you?
They're never going to ask me to run their campaign.
I know, but if they did.
I'm a good Republican, and I've done everything I can to be helpful. He's not my cup of tea. I've run 2 campaigns against him, so the likelihood of them ever want
I ran one against them.
they would ever want my advice? No, But at the end of the day, the drill here is they would never want someone like me. They don't want an outsider. They want someone who's part of their team, and it's a question of trust, and it's not unusual among them. It's you kind of, but this one in particular is kind of and why this array story that's coming apart is more unusual, and I think it's because they were 10 points ahead. Stuart Stevens would be brilliant. When you're 5 points behind, you're not so brilliant.
Yeah, well, there's a wonderful story from JFK after the '60 election. When I think Time magazine called the campaign coruscatingly brilliant, and he walked in and everybody was preening because Time magazine is a really big deal then. Yeah. And he said, "I just want to tell you, I'll change 56,000 votes, and we're coruscatingly stupid."
Right.
So in that sense, I would defend these folks. But the problem is when a campaign gets into trouble, and I think, Ed, you would agree with this, even campaigns that are going to win, like '84, you go through valleys, you go through bad weeks. And that's when you're tested. And the question then is, are people going to have the discipline? If they're going to fight internally, have an argument internally. Don't carry it to the press. Don't go out there and say it's the candidate's fault. Don't go out there and say it's this guy's fault, it's that guy's fault. Because that not only becomes the story, it disrupts your capacity to make decisions that advance a strategy and can help you win a week or two.
Right. Okay, let's go back to the 270, the number. How does Romney get to the number and Obama get to the number? And then also briefly talk about the Senate. We talked a bit about the House. Talk about, Warren and Brown, McCaskill and Aiken, Tim Kaine and Allen.
You want to talk about McCaskill and Aiken?
I laid out the formula. There's only one formula for us at this point in time.
Okay, go ahead.
Florida, come right out of the South. Florida, North Carolina. I think we're ahead in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Virginia, Ohio, and then one other. You have
That's very tough.
You have those 4. You're at 266, counting winning back Indiana, which we will do last time. You're 266. So you can win New Hampshire, you can win Colorado, you can win any of those and basically be there. But Virginia's tough. North Carolina, I think, as I said, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Florida is tough. Ohio's tough.
And Colorado's tough.
But you don't need Colorado.
No, but you need Colorado and New Hampshire.
Right.
And
none of them
are easy. The Iowas aren't easy. The New Hampshires aren't. There's nothing easy.
This illustrates, I think, that there is a steep road for Romney to get to 270.
Yeah.
I think the president has probably about 3 different roads that he can get there. Maybe this was inevitable. I have no idea. But I think it is a product of the fact that, frankly, Romney lost the summer, lost the conventions, and then lost his head during this Libya thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hurt him badly.
Okay.
And by the way, the Democrats, as we said earlier, had a convention that made what I think is about the best possible case you could make for Obama.
Okay, let's go to the Senate. Warren and Brown. I mean, there are a lot of crazy Senate races. What's going to go there? I mean, the latest polling shows it seems to be that she's starting to get some traction.
I think she got a Democratic convention bounce.
I think she did too. I think that comes right down to the wire, though. I think she's a little bit too liberal. You're the expert in Massachusetts. I think she's a little bit too liberal for that blue-collar Democrat there, and
I think it may have been more early on a matter of some cultural disconnect, which their new advertising, I think, may be making up for that.
Right.
If the president carries the state by a really big margin, then I think she's probably in pretty good shape.
What about Virginia? I mean, that's purple anyway. That's another.
Anybody want to flip a coin?
Yeah,
it's a Donnybrook right down to the end, and there is the one place where it depends. I think whoever wins the presidential may have some impact on that.
What about the reverse, the impact of the lower race on the upper race?
I think it all depends on the get out the vote effort.
Okay,
And-
again,
and I think that's the key thing. I would argue in that particular state that Allen probably has a better get out the vote operation than the Romney people at this point in time.
Did Allen
and I think the key
come
thing
back?
there,
I mean, did he overcome his-
is do the African Americans turn out in the record numbers in Virginia like they did?
or in North Carolina for that matter.
I think North Carolina's gone. I think the convention helped seal that.
Okay.
And I think North Carolina it was 7,000 vote difference last time, where Virginia was a 240,000 vote differential to Obama's favor. So I think North Carolina, I think we have a better shot of getting that back at this point in time.
Better shot, I would agree with, but I certainly wouldn't rule out the president winning North Carolina. And they've got a massive voter registration effort underway, or did, in North Carolina.
I want to move into sort of, the future. We briefly alluded to the quote-unquote civil war in the Republican Party. They're starting to look like, the Democrats' circular firing squad. GOP loses. Romney loses on November 6th. What happens to the Republican Party?
I agree with Bob's premise, and I've said it for a long time. There is a holy war, and it depends on the candidate. And I'd throw one other candidate in there that you didn't mention. Bob Dole was another one that basically the conservatives never really wanted.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think the establishment, I think Ryan obviously has got a leg up, but not necessarily a leg up if a Huckabee or someone else decides that they want to get into the race. And it all depends also, and I think the thing about Ryan that people underestimate is the controlling element of the Republican Party today, the governing portion of it, is the House Republicans. And he clearly is the very significant player on that front. I think there's a lot of candidates out there who will try, but I also don't think the Democrats get a free ride next time. I think that there's a front and center battle that's going to go on there, not ideological.
I don't think it's going to be. I think there might be less of a battle than we assume. I think Bill Clinton gave 2 nominating speeches.
Yes, he did. Well,
And one was for Obama in 2012, and the other was for Hillary in 2016.
I think she'd be very tough to beat, and certainly if Joe Biden chooses to run, she'll beat Biden. I think like a drum.
Well, they're both going to be pretty old,
I
aren't they?
don't think.
I don't
listen,
Biden wouldn't run again.
First of all, I think, and Ed's an expert in this because he went through this, I don't think this age stuff matters. I think people look at people and say,
Yep.
are they vigorous? Are they up to the
they
job?
Both, and they both are. No, they both
Yeah, and by the way, I don't think they'll run against each other.
No,
so
they won't, yeah.
I don't think that'll happen.
Is Cantor assured of victory, Eric Cantor in Virginia?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. He's going to win
He
that
is?
seat.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm hoping not.
Right. Well,
I'll tell you,
we're not
you know who
dealing
else
with
is hoping
hopes.
not? You know who else is hoping not? John Boehner.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, right. Right. Right now, you got to bet your house on a candidate. Who wins?
Candidate for what?
President.
I'm not going to bet against Romney.
Okay.
I
Well,
will.
we know where you're betting.
But by the way,
Give me 5
I'd
reasons why I
refuse-
should go to London and put, 500 quid on
Because
Obama.
you can go to Las Vegas cheaper.
Well, that's, okay.
Look,
that's
he's controlling the message. He's winning these weeks, week after week after week. He has a theme that Romney is now playing on, which is who stands up for the middle class, which I don't think is the best grounds for Romney to be playing on. I think he has a superior campaign, both in terms of message and in terms of its operational activity. Something could happen.
And he's a great campaigner. I mean,
And also,
he comes
Ed's Electoral College analysis, which we all agree on, says,
It's not mine. It's everybody's.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen for
but
him
if you don't really
No,
count,
it can happen for him.
happen.
Oh, no, it can happen.
But he has
as
to
you
draw
said-
to an inside stretch.
Right,
does.
right.
But if you watch and you see Obama jump up on the stage and with the grace and everything else and the big smile and the whole kind of campaigning spirit, and then see Romney,
But you're a partisan.
No, but it goes to what he's
I'm
saying.
not-
No,
They
I
should
know.
have run Romney
Right.
as Romney.
Right,
Should have.
right. Instead of somebody else. But Ryan works against that.
no, he doesn't. What do you mean? How does he work against it?
Well, because Romney wasn't good enough to be Romney.
Well, Ryan wasn't good enough for the conservatives.
Right. Okay. We're going to stop there. We should continue, but we won't. Bob Shrum, Ed Rollins.
Thank you.
You
Thank you.
gentlemen
It was
are
fun.
always welcome on the show. I always learn. It's always a graduate seminar. Thank you. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.